It was a summer evening in 1998 when the Johnson family disappeared without a trace. A father, a mother, and their two young children got into their van after visiting friends and were never seen again. For years, the case haunted their small town. Neighbors left porch lights on, hoping they'd return. Police searched the highways, combed through forests, and even dragged rivers, but nothing ever turned up. It was as if the family had been swallowed by the earth itself. 2 decades later, the mystery was all but cold. Most people assumed the Johnsons had been victims of a tragic accident, maybe even foul play. But without answers, the pain lingered like an open wound. For their relatives, every birthday, every holiday, every year that passed carried the same aching question. Where did they go? Then came a discovery no one expected. A hobbyist flying a drone over a remote stretch of woodland noticed something unusual beneath the surface of a shallow pond. At first, it looked like just another shadow, the kind you see when trees bend low over water. But as the drone hovered closer, the outline became clearer. Metal, rusted and sunken, the unmistakable shape of a van. When authorities arrived, their hearts pounded as they confirmed what the camera had captured. The vehicle matched the description of the Johnson family's van, the one that had vanished in 1998 without leaving a trail. But how had it gone unnoticed for so long? How could an entire vehicle sit beneath the water for 2 decades, hidden just out of sight? As a recovery team prepared to pull the van from the murky depths, the weight of the moment pressed on everyone present. The discovery had the potential to finally close one of the most haunting unsolved mysteries of the past 20 years. Yet, with every ripple in the pond, new questions surfaced. Would the van reveal what truly happened to the Johnsons? Or would it only deepen the mystery that had already consumed so many lives? The cables tightened, the van slowly rising from the water, its windows black with mud, its metal groaning from years beneath the surface. Everyone held their breath, waiting for the first glimpse inside. And just as the roof broke through the waterline, the story stopped. The van rose higher, water streaming down its battered frame like tears. For the crowd gathered at the edge of the pond, time felt frozen. This wasn't just a rusted vehicle being pulled from the mud. It was the physical reminder of a family that had vanished without goodbye. Everyone who had lived through 1998 remembered where they were when the Johnsons disappeared. Now, after 20 long years, the questions were about to resurface with more force than ever. Back then, the Johnsons were a picture of normal life. Mark Johnson, the father, worked as a mechanic known for helping stranded motorists on back roads. His wife, Karen, was a schoolteacher loved by her students for her warmth and humor. Their children, Emily and Jacob, were just 9 and 7, bright, full of energy, always running through the neighborhood yards with scraped knees and laughter. On the night they vanished, they had been at a family barbecue. Witnesses remembered them piling into the van, waving goodbye, promising to see everyone the next weekend. But they never made it home. The search that followed was exhaustive. Police set up roadblocks, divers searched nearby rivers. Volunteers combed through fields with flashlights late into the night. Billboards with their smiling faces went up, and news anchors repeated their names every evening, keeping hope alive. But after months of searching, the case grew colder, and speculation began to replace facts. Some believed the Johnsons had run from debts. Others whispered about something darker. Yet, without evidence, the mystery sat like a stone in the town's heart. And now here was the van, silent and waterlogged, hiding its secrets for decades. The thought was chilling. If the van had been in that pond all this time, how had no one noticed? The pond wasn't far from a road, not far from the very route search teams had once scoured. Could it have been overlooked? Or was it hidden on purpose? Detectives standing by the recovery site knew this discovery would reignite every unanswered question. Was this truly an accident? A wrong turn ending in tragedy? Or had something far more sinister been at play that summer night? As the tow cables strained and the van creaked against the weight of years, even the most seasoned officers felt unease. Relatives who had come to witness the recovery clutched one another, torn between the hope of closure and the fear of what they might see inside. The emotional weight pressed down on everyone, because this was not just a vehicle. It was a coffin of memories, possibly holding the final moments of a family once full of life. The roof of the van finally broke free from the pond, dripping with weeds, windows blackened with mud. Cameras zoomed in, reporters whispered, and the crowd leaned closer. The truth was almost within reach, yet still just out of sight. The groan of metal echoed across the clearing as the van inched higher, its roof glistening with pond water under the fading daylight. The gathered crowd held its breath, but what they didn't realize was that this recovery was only the beginning. With every inch of steel that surfaced, the stakes climbed higher, not only for the family's memory, but for the people who had spent 20 years searching for the truth. Detective Laura Grant, who had worked the original case as a rookie officer, stood near the tow truck, arms crossed, eyes locked on the van. Time had streaked her hair with gray, but her memories of the Johnson disappearance were still sharp. She remembered knocking on doors, questioning neighbors, watching the case slip through her fingers as leads ran dry. To her, this wasn't just about evidence, it was about redemption. But the younger detectives on the scene, eager to prove themselves, saw it differently. They wanted fast answers, a clean ending. That tension simmered just beneath the surface, threatening to erupt. Among the bystanders was Peter Hales, the Johnsons' former neighbor. He had been one of the last to see the family alive, waving to them as they pulled away in the van. For years, suspicion had fallen on him, his reclusive lifestyle, his odd late-night habits. Though police never charged him, whispers had lingered. Now, as the van emerged, Peter felt every eye on him again. His jaw tightened, his fists clenched. He knew that once investigators searched the van, people would start digging through his past all over again. And then there were the relatives. Mark's younger brother, David, had never forgiven himself. He had been supposed to meet the Johnsons later that night, but canceled last minute. That decision had haunted him. What if he could have prevented what happened? Watching the van rise from the pond, David was gripped by both hope and dread. Hope that answers were finally within reach. Dread that the truth might be more than he could bear. As the van's windows came into view, everyone leaned closer. The glass was thick with grime, impossible to see through. But when one of the floodlights hit just right, a faint shape appeared inside, something slumped, unmoving. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Reporters whispered. The camera shutters clicked in a frenzy. Detective Grant's stomach knotted. She signaled the crew to pause, torn between duty and instinct. Was she ready to see what waited inside? And what if the discovery confirmed the darkest suspicions? That the Johnsons' disappearance had never been an accident at all. The moral weight of the moment was crushing. If the van held remains, it could finally bring closure. But closure also meant pain, truth that could shatter lives. Families would have to face reality, suspects might emerge, and reputations could collapse. As silence pressed down, the tow cables tightened once more. The van shifted with a screech, its front bumper breaking free of the water. The crowd leaned in, but Detective Grant raised her hand, halting the recovery for a moment. She scanned the faces around her, the neighbors, the relatives, the reporters. Some were desperate for answers, others terrified of what might surface. In that heavy pause, one thought lingered. What if the real story wasn't just about what happened in 1998, but about what people have been hiding ever since? The van dangled just above the surface now, suspended by thick steel cables that strained under its weight. Water poured from the cracked seams, splashing back into the pond in heavy bursts. Every drip echoed like a ticking clock, each second pulling the crowd deeper into suspense. Detective Grant stood closest. Her hand hovered at her side, unsure if she should give the signal to continue. She felt the pressure of 20 years in that moment. Years of unanswered questions, of families without closure, of a town haunted by silence. This was it. Answers were just a breath away. "Keep it steady," she muttered. Her voice cracked slightly, betraying the emotion she usually kept buried. Beside her, David Johnson's face was pale. His hands trembled as he stared at the van. He couldn't look away. In his mind, flashes of his brother Mark appeared, laughing at the barbecue, grilling burgers, hugging his kids goodbye. The thought that they might be inside, frozen in time, tore him apart. He wanted the truth. Yet part of him wished the van would sink back into the pond, erasing the moment forever. Reporters pressed forward, cameras flashing. The tension shifted, thickened. Some townsfolk began whispering again, their eyes darting toward Peter Hales, the old neighbor. He could feel the judgment burning through him, the weight of decades-old suspicion. His chest rose and fell sharply. He wanted to shout, to defend himself, but words caught in his throat. If the van revealed foul play, he knew he'd be dragged back into the storm. A creak rang out as the van's undercarriage scraped against a submerged rock. The cables groaned. For a terrifying second, it seemed the van might slip. Gasps spread through the crowd. The floodlights flickered as the machine operator adjusted his grip, pulling harder, fighting the suction of 2 decades of mud. Then silence. The van hung still, suspended between water and air, between past and present. Detective Grant took a step forward. Her flashlight beam hit one of the side windows. The grime shifted, streaked by the water draining down. And there was again the unmistakable shape inside. A headrest, a slumped outline, human. The crowd erupted into low murmurs. Some clutched their mouths. Others leaned forward, desperate for confirmation. "Don't move it yet," Grant ordered, her voice sharp now. Her instincts screamed caution. Evidence could vanish in a second if they rushed. David staggered closer, his voice breaking. "That's them. It has to be them. No one knows for sure." Grant snapped back, though her heart pounded in agreement. The van shifted again, groaning as mud released its grip. Weeds trailed from the bumper like skeletal fingers. Every movement seemed deliberate, as if the vehicle itself resisted being pulled into the light. Tension rippled through the gathering, suspicion, fear, guilt, grief, all colliding. The past was clawing its way back, ready to confront everyone standing there. Detective Grant lowered her flashlight. She inhaled, steadying herself. Then she raised her hand. The operator nodded, preparing to lift the van completely free. The next second would change everything. The van finally broke free from the mud, swinging slightly as the crane steadied its grip. Floodlights bathed the rusted shell in harsh white, casting long shadows across the gathered crowd. For a breathless moment, everyone waited for the truth to emerge. But instead of clarity, the night took a darker, more complicated turn. Detective Grant motioned the crew forward. As the vehicle settled onto the muddy bank, the crowd pressed closer, anticipation reaching its peak. But the moment her flashlight cut across the side door, she froze. The license plate, barely legible beneath the rust, didn't match the Johnson's van. A wave of confusion rippled through the onlookers. Gasps, whispers, disbelief. Had everyone been wrong? David Johnson staggered forward, his voice trembling. "That's not their van. It can't be." His words shattered the fragile hope that had carried him here. The possibility of closure dissolved in an instant. But Grant's instincts told her something else. If this wasn't the Johnson's van, then whose was it? And why was it hidden in the very pond that had been searched countless times before? Her pulse quickened. This wasn't just about one missing family anymore. This was bigger. The side door creaked as investigators forced it open. A foul stench spilled into the night, silencing even the reporters. Inside, the faint outlines became clear. Not 4 people, but one. A single figure slumped behind the wheel. Male. Decayed beyond recognition. The crowd erupted. Questions flew. Who was he? What did this mean for the Johnson case? Had the discovery been a tragic mistake or a warning? Grant's mind raced. If this was another victim, then someone had been using the pond as a graveyard. And if so, the Johnsons' disappearance might not have been an isolated tragedy. It might have been part of a much larger pattern, one that had stayed buried for decades. Peter Hales felt the weight of every accusing stare. Neighbors whispered louder now, suspicion clawing back to the surface. His fists clenched at his sides. He had lived under suspicion once, and it had nearly destroyed him. Now, with this new body, his silence looked like guilt. Grant's flashlight swept over the interior again. Something glinted on the dashboard, an old keychain. Her heart stopped. It bore the initials MJ, Mark Johnson. The crowd didn't see it yet, but Grant knew the discovery was no coincidence. Someone had planted a clue. Someone wanted the past to resurface now, after 20 years. She stepped back, her mind spinning. This wasn't closure, it was a message. And whoever had sent it was still out there, watching. The recovery site, once filled with hope, now boiled with suspicion and fear. The story had changed direction, and instead of answers, the night had opened a door to an even darker truth. The crowd pressed forward as investigators circled the van. Floodlights hummed, moths swarming in the harsh glow, but the silence among the people was absolute. Every eye was fixed on the open door, where the single body slumped behind the wheel. Detective Grant stepped closer, the mud sucking at her boots. She leaned inside, her flashlight catching the faint glimmer of the keychain again. MJ. Her chest tightened. The initials matched Mark Johnson, yet the figure was clearly not him. The face, what little remained of it, was older, rougher. This wasn't a father driving his family home. It was someone else entirely. Grant pulled the keychain free, holding it up for the cameras. Murmurs surged through the crowd, confusion mixing with dread. David Johnson staggered forward, tears burning his eyes. That's his. That was my brother's. His voice broke on the last word. The moral weight settled hard on everyone present. If the keychain was Mark's, then whoever sat behind the wheel had taken it, which meant the Johnson family hadn't just vanished. They had been victims, and the driver of this van was connected. Grant's mind raced back through the case files, through every lead that had died, every testimony that hadn't fit. A chilling realization struck. The pond had been searched years ago, but the van hadn't been there then, which meant it had been moved, planted recently. This wasn't a discovery. It was a message. Her gaze swept the crowd. Suspicion had circled Peter Hales all evening, but now she noticed something different. In the chaos, his eyes weren't on the van. They were on David, watching him, measuring him. Grant's instincts sharpened. She recalled something buried in the original reports. David had canceled plans with his brother that night in 1998. He'd always claimed guilt over it, but guilt could mask something deeper, something darker. The operator cut the cables, and the van thudded onto the muddy ground. Reporters shouted questions, flashes erupted, and the crowd pressed in tighter. Grant turned to David. His face was pale, sweat dripping, his body trembling. But it wasn't grief, it was fear. She stepped toward him slowly, voice low but firm. This isn't just about closure, is it, David? His eyes darted around, desperate for escape. You don't understand, he whispered, shaking his head. I didn't mean for it to happen. The crowd gasped. Peter Hales froze, his decades of suspicion dissolving in an instant. Grant steadied herself, the pieces clicking together. David hadn't shown up that night, because he already knew what had happened. And now, the van, planted, revealed, was forcing his secret to the surface. The real betrayal had been hiding in plain sight. Not in the neighbor, not in the town, but in blood. As David sank to his knees in the mud, sobbing under the weight of 20 years, the truth finally tore through the silence. The Johnson family had not been lost to chance. They had been betrayed from within. And just as the crowd erupted, Grant's radio crackled with a new report. Another submerged vehicle had been spotted, this time deeper in the woods. The story wasn't over. The night air was heavy with silence after David's confession. Floodlights still bathed the clearing, but the energy around the recovered van had shifted. What had begun as a hopeful search for closure had unraveled into betrayal, heartbreak, and new mysteries still waiting beneath the surface. Detective Grant stood quietly, letting the moment settle. Around her, reporters scrambled to broadcast the shocking twist. Neighbors whispered to one another, and relatives clung together. Their grief now reshaped into something far more complicated. The decades-long suspicion that had shadowed Peter Hales faded at last. He stood apart, staring into the pond, relief and bitterness mixing on his face. For years he had carried the burden of whispers, but tonight the truth had freed him, even as it destroyed someone else. David Johnson, broken and trembling, was taken into custody. His tears stained the mud as he was led away, a man finally crushed by the weight of secrets he had buried for 20 years. For his family, there were no easy answers. Betrayal cut deeper than disappearance. Yet in a strange way, truth, no matter how painful, offered the first step toward healing. As the van sat rusting on the bank, Detective Grant turned the keychain in her hand. MJ. Mark Johnson's initials glinted faintly in the harsh light. It was a symbol not just of what had been lost, but of how fragile trust could be. She thought of the children, of the life stolen too soon, and of the town that had been haunted for decades by questions with no answers. Now, some of those answers had come, but closure, she realized, was never simple. The second report, that another submerged vehicle had been found deeper in the woods, reminded everyone that mysteries rarely exist in isolation. One truth uncovers another, and the past has a way of clawing back when least expected. The story was not finished. Yet tonight marked a turning point. The Johnsons would no longer be remembered only as a question mark in the town's history, but as a family whose story finally saw the light. For the community, the discovery became a reminder of how silence, suspicion, and unresolved grief can poison lives. For the viewers who followed this journey, it became more than a true crime mystery. It became a reflection of how fragile trust is, how deep betrayal cuts, and how desperately we seek answers, even when they hurt. As Detective Grant prepared to leave the site, she turned back once more toward the pond. Its surface was calm again, rippling under the moonlight as if nothing had ever disturbed it. But everyone who stood there that night would carry its memory forever. Because in the end, the real story wasn't just about a van or confession. It was about a truth too long hidden, and a lesson we all must face. What stays buried will always find a way back to the surface. And so, the final call is to you, the listener. Never stop asking questions. Never stop searching, because the answers we seek can change everything.